All right. Now, apologies to the AV desk. I rolled up late with an unannounced keynote presentation, so I'm not sure if it's been able to work. Is it working, or shall we just imagine the screen today? It doesn't. It's not critical. It'd be nice, but it's not critical. So if it doesn't work, then that's okay. No good. Okay, that's all right. 1 billion. I was going to have just imagine 1 billion written there. How many zeros are on the end of 1 billion? You got a 1 and how many zeros? 9 zeros, right. Big number? How long do you think it would take to count to 1 billion? I want to ask 3 people. And you got to just take a guess, a wild guess. How long do you think it would take to count to 1 billion? I saw a fungi here. Where's Bongi and fungi? What do you reckon, fungi? How long will it take to count to 1 billion? I'll tell you what. You get to sleep for 8 hours of the day, and then you get 1 hour for breakfast, 1 hour for lunch, and 1 hour for dinner. Other than that, you spend the rest of your time counting. How long would it take to count to 1 billion? 2 days? Okay, we need to go higher. Millie. 3 years? No, we need to go a lot higher. Paul. 100 years. Getting closer. It depends how fast you count. You're going to need to stop for drinks and to clear your throat, but it would take around about 300 years. 300 years. So a billion is a big number? It's not really that big. It's not. You'll see. It's not actually that big of a number. A billion. It could take maybe even over 300 years to count to a billion. So I've called this sermon, "What's Going On?" I often have a lot of questions that pop into my mind, and I sometimes think about some pretty strange things. And I've called this sermon, "What's Going On?" And a subtitle could be, "Things that I don't know and things that I do." And so this morning I want to share with you some things that I don't know, which is kind of weird because I don't know how I'm going to share with you things that I don't know. But there's some things that I do know, and I want to also share with you some of those things as well. Sometimes I wish I knew exactly what's going on with everything in the world. But then I think, well, maybe I don't want to know, or maybe I shouldn't know. But the fact is that I can't know, and so that puts that to bed. Nobody can know everything that's going on in the world. Let's pray first, and then we'll have a look at a passage in Isaiah chapter 40. Almighty Father in heaven, we just pause to acknowledge you, and as we delve into your word, we ask that your Spirit will illuminate our minds and our hearts, help us to understand just a tiny bit of your power and your grandeur, and also your love and your tenderness to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Isaiah 40, verse 11. Isaiah 40, verse 11 and verse 12. Here we go. Isaiah 40, verse 11. This is a remarkable passage. I've known about this passage, I've read it for many, many years, but it just suddenly dawned on me recently how amazingly contrasting these two verses are. One right after the other. Verse 11 says, it's talking about the Father, talking about God, talking about Jesus. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. So straight away we think of a shepherd and we think of a beautiful personal relationship with a innocent, defenseless creature. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with his arms and carry them in his bosom, or carry them against his chest, and shall gently lead those that are with young. So it gives us a really intimate and close and gentle and personal understanding of what God is like. But the very next verse blows us out of this sort of close-up realm, and it says, so he, the shepherd, also this same being, God, he has measured out the waters in the hollow of his hand. You know when you make a palm like this and you stretch it out? Have you ever tried to see how much water you can hold in that little dimple in the middle of your hand? And God measures the oceans. You ever been out in a boat and you've been so far out that you cannot see land? And you look at the radar and find out how deep it is, and it might be 150 meters deep or whatever. He measures the oceans, the waters, in the tiny little hollow of God's hand. And he metes out the heavens with a span. A span is like a cubit. It's the old-fashioned word for a span, a cubit. It's like your forearm, the length of your forearm. He measures the universe, the skies, just with that small measurement, which for him is big enough to measure the universe, the infinite galaxies and beyond. And he weighs the mountains in scales and the hills in balance. Then it says, who has directed the Spirit of God or been his counselor and taught him? Anybody here? Any show of hands? Who has been able to teach God a thing or two ever? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord or being his counselor hath taught him? With whom took he counsel? And who instructed him and taught him the path of judgment and taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? God is infinitely omniscient, or infinitely knowing, all-knowing. There is nothing that we can teach him. And yet, he's so gentle and so personal. He's big enough to measure the oceans of the world just in that tiny little dimple in his hand, but he's also small enough to care about Phil's diffuser. What a God, huh? What a God we serve. It says in verse 15, behold, the nations are as a drop of the bucket. That's a saying that we use quite commonly. That saying originated in the Bible. It's a drop in the bucket. You find a lot of sayings, you come across a lot of sayings in life that actually have their origin in the Bible. So there's this amazing contrast with God. On one hand, he's so present and gentle and tender and near to us. But on the other hand, he's just so vast and beyond anything that we can even begin to imagine. A billion. So a billion, you think a billion, it'd take 300, maybe 250 years if you're very fast, maybe 400 years if you're slow. But it'd take, say 300 years to count to a billion. But it's actually a pretty small number. Do you know, the best of science can tell us how many atoms there are in the observable universe, okay? So we have the number 1 billion. 1 billion is 10 to the power of 8. In other words, 10 with another 8 zeros. That makes 9 zeros, so that's 1 billion. They estimate that the number of atoms in the observable universe is 10 to the power of 80. So that's 10 with 80 zeros. And I wrote it out, like I typed it out so that you could see on the screen exactly how many zeros it looks like on paper to have 80 zeros after the number 10. 80 zeros. So if you can imagine 1 billion is 10 to the power of just 8, and it would take 250, 300 years to count to that. Atoms in the observable universe, 10 to the power of not 8, but 80. And that's just a complete guess, really. Scientists do the best they can, but they're just human. They're just mortal. They don't really know. Claude Shannon was a mathematician and a computer science who was, he was significant in the contributions that he put to developing computer chess. We've probably all heard of Deep Blue. Back in the 90s, I remember reading an article about Deep Blue, which was a computer chess machine, and it was up against Kasparov, who was at the time the best chess player in the world. And then now you've got Carl Magnuson, a young fellow. I don't know if he's still the champion, but chess. So Claude Shannon, this mathematician, estimated that the possible moves and scenarios and various sequences that there are in a game of chess that you could possibly do would be 10 to the power of 126. So atoms in the observable universe, 10 to the power of 80. 10 to the power of 80. Combinations and moves in chess, 10 to the power of 126. That's known as Claude's, as Shannon's number. That's a big number. There we go, 10 to the power. Okay, can we go to the next slide? This is brilliant. So that's 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the observable universe. Can we go to the next slide? Is it possible? Well, if it's not, just imagine like almost double the amount of zeros for how many possible moves and scenarios and ways of... Oh, is that a... Can I use that, can I? Beauty. Thanks, Dan. Back and forth, right. Okay, so let's go. Do I have to point it at the computer? There we go. Maybe it's not working. Oops. 10 to the power of 126. I'll write this out for you, so it's nice that I can show you. That's how many possible moves and scenarios and different ways of playing chess that you can do. And that's only chess. Chess is a little game. It's 8 by 8 squares, 8 squares by 8 squares, and my side has 2 rows of 8, so that's 16 characters, and my opponent has 16 characters, and we play this game of chess. And all the different possible combinations of moves that there are that you could possibly play, ways of possibly playing, 10 to the power of 126. But as we will discover, that's actually only a fairly small number as well. It's not that big of a number. Oopsie, what have I done? Here we go. So when you think about chess, you have 2 plays, and you have light-coloured pieces and you have dark-coloured pieces. Now just imagine this, you're playing a game of chess and there are that many combinations of moves and it's just on a small board. But what if you up the stakes and instead of having a board 8 by 8, you're playing with people like the population of Earth. So let's say there's 8 billion, approximately 8 billion people in the world. So I've got 4 billion, you've got 4 billion, so I've got a row of 2 billion and a row of 2 billion, that makes my 4 billion, and you've got 2 rows of 2 billion, that makes 4 billion. And so we're playing at a much, much higher level. Now, on a small chessboard, if there's 10 to the power of 126 possible combinations, how many possible combinations would there be if you're playing not with 16 characters, but with 4 billion characters each? You can't. So already it's too much for our little brains. Can we get to the next? I got to hold my mouth right to get to the next slide. Nope. Clicky. There we go. No, I've gone back. Anyway, I'm not sure what's happening here. Shall I turn it off and then on again? That usually works. No? Right, let's just leave that. It looks like the guys up the back are having a go at sorting it out. Okay, so I used AI and I punched in it to AI and asked AI to come up with a mathematical formula to tell me how many possible moves there would be if we were playing a game of chess that was what did we just say? 2 billion by 2 billion to give us 4 billion, 8 million players altogether. The number, and I didn't try to write this out. I mean, I wrote 10 to the power of 126 out for you. I've got enough zeros there, but I didn't worry about this next one because this next number was 10 to the power of 65 trillion 536 billion possible moves. Okay, so let me try and help you understand. 10 to the power of 8 is a billion. It'd take 300 years to count to that. That's only 10 to the power of 8. What if we did 10 to the power of 65.5 trillion? 65.5 trillion is a lot more than 8, right? That's how many possible combinations there would be in a game of chess if you were playing with characters that would equal the population of the world. Do you see where I'm going with this? Then what if the board that you're playing on wasn't just a flat two-dimensional board? What if you factored time into it as well? Because there's 8 billion people in the world now, but what about since creation? So imagine if we made this chessboard three-dimensional, and I've heard there is three-dimensional chess. I'm not actually much of a chess enthusiast, but I was just thinking about this for some reason. So now imagine a three-dimensional game of chess. Still you've got like 4 billion, but now you've got a third dimension. So I typed it into AI and did my best to try and set the parameters. And it gave me a new number, 10 to the power of 1 quadrillion. It's too big of a number. It said, when I typed in the thing, it gave me this number, 10 to the power of a quadrillion, and said that it's too much. Like, it'd probably be 100 years before AI is good enough to calculate those sort of, mathematical things. So not happy with that. Let's turn the heat up even more, right? Let's make the game so that you're not playing with inanimate little white pieces or black pieces. You're playing a game with pieces that have their own will, their own free agency. They can actually move on the board wherever they like, whenever they like. You can't control, you can influence where they might go, but that's about all you can do. And there's 8 billion right now, but there's been 6,000 years worth of population. And you're trying to play this game to win as many of these free agents to the light side, because you don't want any of them to die. But then you're playing an adversary who all he wants to do is kill them. He doesn't have to influence them. He just needs them dead. Which is, killing somebody is a lot easier than influencing somebody to change their ideology and to rewire their mind and their heart and their character. It's a lot easier just to kill somebody, isn't it? So what if we up the stakes even more? Now you're playing a game where it's this massive three-dimensional game where the number of possible moves and combinations is so infinite that you just can't even start to scratch the surface to comprehend it. But then now you're playing with free agents, not little idle pieces that you can move around where you want. But suddenly the rules that you're playing, that you're using, the rules of engagement that you're using, are completely different to the rules of engagement that your opponent is using. So your opponent is manipulating the characters, forcing, coercing, controlling, bullying, intimidating the pieces into doing and moving and acting as he will. But I can't do that. The best that I can do is to influence the characters on this board through patience, kindness, gentleness, love. I can't even offer riches as a reward. I can offer hope and like peace, and I can offer a future reward. So even here, the rules of engagement that I'm playing with are different. My rules are different to the rules that my foe in this fantastic game of chess. Proverbs 5:21. Do you remember that picture that was on the board with the two people playing this chess? Proverbs 5:21 says, "The ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all their goings." You see the picture of the apparently the guy that looked like the good guy, and he was looking. He had his elbow on the thing on the table, and had his chin in his hand, and he was looking at the pieces, and he was pondering. Well, this verse says that the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his goings. You get the picture that God is thinking deeply about us. He wants the best for us. He wants us to move out of darkness into his marvelous light. But he can only draw us through bands of loving kindness. He can't use the tactics that his opponent is using. And so he sits and he ponders all of our goings. How many possible scenarios, and sometimes I think, it's just too much for my little brain, Sometimes I went through a phase where I started to think, there's not even any point praying, because I might pray that my wedding day is going to be sunny. But then the next door neighbour at the venue where I'm going to be getting married at, their retic may have failed, and they may be Christian, and they may be praying that God sends them rain on that day, and I'm praying that. And so then I started thinking, well, just because I'm only using my wisdom, I'm not using God's, But when we think about it from God's perspective, the computing power in the mind of God makes 1 billion. Like, he hasn't even warmed up yet. Like, 10 to the power of 1 quadrillion, he hasn't even gotten out of bed yet. We can, to use a human expression, the computing power and the wisdom and the omniscience of God, I don't even know why I'm trying to explain it, because I'm not going to get anywhere. Because I don't even understand it myself, but I love it and I trust it. Because I see enough in his character that we can see. And the Bible reveals enough about his character that gives me confidence that all of his computing power is aimed at our salvation. Isn't that a marvelous thought? Oh, man. Do you know there's Job? Think about the story of Job, and I'm not sure if... I'd imagine most of us here would be familiar with the story of Job, and if there's somebody that's not, have a look at it, because it's an amazing little window into the realms of what we're talking about. So God was a man who was perfect and upright, and he had a family, and he loved his family, and he prayed for them, and he was a godly man. And the devil said to God, you're only looking after Job because he loves and respects you. And so God said, all right, well, let's see. Why don't you go and take away all of his riches? And so the devil went and took away all of his riches, including killing his sons and daughters. 7 sons, 3 daughters. Yeah, 7 sons, 3 daughters. Job was heartbroken, but he refused to curse God. So then the devil said, yeah, look, people will do whatever they want for their own life, but if you touch him himself, his health, his life, and God said, don't kill him, but see what happens if you maim him or whatever. So then Satan sent nasty boils all over Job's body, and he was just racked with pain and discomfort. And 3 friends came to visit him, and they sat for days, was it 7 days or 40 days, and didn't say a single thing. And then eventually they started to dialogue and talk. And then eventually in Job 38, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" That's what I feel like right now, to be honest. Darkening counsel by words without knowledge, because I don't really know what I'm talking about. Suffice it to say that I know a tiny bit about the love of God and about his trustworthiness and his goodness. But I'm trying to just stretch our minds a little bit to try and grasp just a tiny taste of how grand and all-knowing and all-powerful he is. There's this chapter in Ministry of Healing. Ministry of Healing is a book that I really, really love. Ministry of Healing, and it's, here we go. The chapter or the sub-chapter is called Searching into Divine Mysteries. And there's lots of divine mysteries, and they'll always remain mysteries because we're not God. And if we did understand them, then we would be God, but we're not God, so that's why they're mysteries. But it says things like this: the secret things, and this is a quote from Deuteronomy, of course, the secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever and ever. So there are things that he reveals to us and they belong to us, but there are things that belong to God, and we just can't comprehend them. Even the angels were not permitted to share the counsel between the Father and the Son when the plan of salvation was laid. Human beings are not to intrude into the secrets of the Most High, because we are as ignorant as little children. But as little children, we may love and obey him. Do you remember as a kid, you'd want to know what mum and dad were talking about? Or you'd ask something that wasn't appropriate for you to know, and mum and dad would just say, I'll tell you when you get bigger. And you'd be like, oh, I want to know now. But in their wisdom, they knew that it'd be futile to explain to them. And so they would just naturally say, I'm not going to tell you now because you won't understand. Familiar, you hear me? And so this is the same as God with us. As little children, we may love and obey him. Instead of speculating in regard to his nature or his prerogatives, what's a prerogative? His rights. He's the potter, we're the clay. He does things that we don't understand. He does things because it's his right to do things. We may not understand, but we can love him and we can obey him. Let us give heed to the words he has spoken. Can you by searching find out God? Can you find out the Almighty unto perfection? It is as high as heaven. What can thou do? Deeper than hell, what can you know? And then it goes on and on, but I'll read a few other snippets out here. God is to be acknowledged from as much as what he does not reveal about himself as that which is open to our limited comprehension. Isn't that amazing? So God is to be known as much by what we can't know about him, by what we can. And that is to say, all the things that we can't know about God should give us confidence that it's because he is God and that he can be trusted. He has got the computing power to be perfectly confident and able to bring us in our lives, as poor and as wretched as they are, all the way to complete salvation. God has given mysteries to command our faith. This must be so. We may ever be searching, ever inquiring, ever learning, and yet there is an infinity beyond. There is no searching of his understanding, it says in Isaiah 40. There is no searching of his understanding. It says, the ways of man, yes, I read this one. The ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his goings. There's another verse in the Bible that says, who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? And then there's a psalm that says, teach us what we shall say to him. For we cannot even set our speech in order by reason of our darkness. I could read you a lot more of that passage in Ministry of Healing about searching into the divine mysteries, but I think that'll do for now. And so sometimes when I get these questions in my head, and I remember in primary school one morning, we filed into the class and the teacher was really excited and really animated and really, so she told us why she was so excited, and she said that, and happy. And she said that she'd left home, she'd closed the door, walked to the car, and then realised that she'd forgotten her key. So she had to spend an extra 5 minutes or whatever going back around the shed to find the spare key hidden, and then get back into the house and find her car keys and get back out. Finally she got in the car, and then some way down the road, there was all these cars banked up. And then there was police and fire brigades and everything, and then she found out, maybe the policeman told her or something, but she found out that exactly 5 minutes ago, a truck careered out of control and T-boned a motorist and killed the motorist. And she was so excited and counting it such a blessing, and it was a blessing that it wasn't her. But in my mind, I thought, yeah, but teacher, it was still another person. And she was she was thinking how much of a blessing it was that it wasn't her, and that was a blessing because we liked our teacher. But in my head, I'm thinking, but it was still another person, and it was still a human being, and they probably still had a husband or a wife or children that loved them, and the heartache is still there, and I couldn't quite understand why she was so happy and thankful, and I don't know if I even still understand. But sometimes it annoys me when we get into an echo chamber and into this small-minded way of thinking where we think that we have everything sewn up in our heads, and we don't stop to realise that there are others outside of just us in the world. The world doesn't just revolve around me. There are others out there as well. There are people, many, many more people in the world born in poverty than what are born in luxury. I live in luxury, really. I'm not rich, but I am rich in world standards. I think I was talking to a friend of mine, Dan, you guys know Dan Tonkin. our great mate Dan Tonkin, and he was telling me that his parents only were going to have 2 children. They decided that they would only have 2 children. But tragically, their firstborn was stillborn, it died in the womb at birth, and it was a girl. And it was absolutely heartbreaking, and the trauma and the pain. You can imagine, maybe some people here have lost a child at birth, and I don't even want to imagine it because I'll probably start crying, but it's just such a sad, sad thing. And then eventually they went on and they had another son, another child who was then their firstborn because the original one had passed. And then eventually after that they had a third, which was Dan. So Dan is actually the third born, but the second child. So Dan was telling me that he shouldn't actually exist. Do you get see where I'm going with this? Like, his parents only wanted 2 children, so Daniel should not exist if it hadn't have been for the fact that his older sister died at birth. And you try and understand things in life and think like, God, like, what if I had like all the sliding doors that could happen and may happen if this happens, and if that doesn't happen, then this might happen, and that's only in my life. What if I had 2 older sisters and no younger brother? I would be a different person. And I'd sometimes imagine, like, who am I? Like, what if I hadn't have grown up in Papua New Guinea, if I had have grown up in, say, Japan as a missionary kid, or if I wasn't a missionary kid at all, I would be a different person. I'd still be me, but I'd be a different me. You know what I mean? And all these things just spin around in my head, and I think, God, like, how does the computing power that God has to order the events that happen in life and to make sense of it and to be above it all and to still bring about the best? You know, what an amazing miracle answer to prayer of Phil. But Phil, imagine if God hadn't answered your prayer like that. Because a lot of people don't have their prayers answered like that. And you think, like, how does God... But it's not our burden to think about. It really isn't. God knows what he's doing, friends. He has everything under control. Do you know the prophecies in the Bible? I listened to a documentary years ago, and it was talking about the mathematical probability for one person in history to be born and to fulfill all of the ancient prophecies in the Bible. And the mathematical probability, I can't remember the number, but it was like one of these massive big numbers. It just blows your mind. Because, friends, God has got everything in order. Despite the chaos that we see in life, despite the fact that we can't understand it, and these things are way too high for us to even grapple with and understand, God has everything in control. There's I felt like after a while of thinking about all this, I read this verse that kind of felt like a bit of a smack on the nose for me being a naughty puppy, and it says Ecclesiastes 5:1-2, watch your step when you go into the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with your mouth, and let not your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and you are upon the earth. Therefore let your words be few. So I feel like I need to be a little bit careful this morning. But my burden this morning is to try and help you to open your mind and understand the infinite, unfathomable, unsearchable omniscience of God, which is coupled by his equally large love. You know that verse that we opened with? He carries the tender little sheep in his bosom, in his chest, and gently leads those that are with young. And this is the same God that measures out the waters in that little hollow of his hand. What an amazing God that we serve. It's just too much for our brains to understand, but it's just so beautiful to see the character of God like that. You know, when Mum died earlier this year, there was this song that I remember as a young guy at Vic Park. We had a men's cry and we sang this song called "Farther Along," And the words go, tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, living never molested, though in the wrong. And you probably know the song. I remember there was me and Nigel and Cliff and Everett, and there was a bunch of us in the choir. But the chorus goes, farther along, we'll know more about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. The second verse said, when death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. You know, friends, all the mysteries that we don't understand in life, the fact is that, Father, later, soon, we will know more about it. We won't ever know everything about it because we're not God. But one day, God will bring in justice for everybody, and He'll tell us a little bit more about it. There's the last verse in that song goes, faithful till death, said our loving Master. A few more days to labour and wait. Toils of the road will then seem as nothing as we sweep through the beautiful gate. You know, friends, have a look at Hebrews 2:9. Hebrews 2:9 is the checkmate of my sermon. It's the master stroke of the omniscient mind of God, the absolute genius chess player, the master stroke of the creator of all things in Hebrews 2:9. Back to this idea of chess, right? So we've imagined all these things, all these scenarios, the three-dimensional 8 billion thing of chess, and tried to understand like the mathematical calculations of all the possible scenarios and everything. But the masterstroke in this whole scenario is that although Satan has the advantage because he can use all of these unfair tactics, guess what the masterstroke was? That God became a player on the chessboard. You know what I mean? He actually reduced himself down in this mysterious process called the incarnation, and he became a man on the chessboard. It wasn't enough for him to be behind the shadows in his majestic realms, vying for man's affection. He became a player on the board. Hebrews 2:9 says, but we see Jesus, who is made a little lower than the angels, for the crowning of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should what? Should taste death for every man. He had the master stroke because he became a player. See, Satan didn't have that move. Satan couldn't do that because Satan is not God. But God did that. And that was the mystery. Friends, the revelation of God's love to man centers in the cross. Its full significance, tongue cannot utter, pen cannot portray, the mind of man cannot comprehend. Looking upon the cross of Calvary, we can only say, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Christ crucified for our sins, Christ risen from the dead, Christ ascended on high is the science of salvation. And this is what we can learn, and this is what we can teach. This is the master stroke of genius, the chessmate, the checkmate. And that's what gets me through all of life's perplexing questions and challenges and issues and things that we feel like aren't fair, when I consider that Christ took my sins and held them as his own sins and died in my stead and bled so that I can have his life. O soul, are you weary and troubled, alone in the darkness? Do you feel like sometimes there's just darkness and you can't see through the darkness? There is light for a look at the Saviour, and life more abundant and free if we turn our eyes to Jesus. You know, that's not the song we're going to close with. The song we're going to close with is this amazing song that talks about things that we cannot know, and it talks about things that we can know. And it's hymn number 255. Hymn number 255, I Cannot Tell. And it starts off by saying, I cannot tell why he whom angels worship should set his love upon the souls of me and men and people. And then another verse says, I cannot tell how silently he suffered, as with his peace he graced this world of tears. I can't tell how his heart upon the cross was broken, the crown of pain to 33 years. And then this one, it says, I cannot tell how he will win the nations. You know, we're talking about the population of the world through time. I can't tell how God will win the nations, how he will claim his heritage, how he will satisfy the needs and aspirations of East and West. You think of like Ukraine and Russia and Taiwan and China and Palestine and Israel and, you know, the needs and aspirations of East and West. How is God going to satisfy all of these things? But he is the master chess player. He has the computing power of God. Well, there is nothing that he can't do, nothing that he doesn't know. He has got a set of rules of engagement by which he must follow based on his own character. But the masterstroke, the genius masterstroke, is Jesus being put on the chessboard as a man. And that's what wins the game for everybody. I cannot tell how all the lands will worship when at his bidding every storm is stilled. Or who can say how great the tribulation when all of our hearts with love for him are filled. But each verse, the end of each verse sings about things that we do know. I do know, we do know, we can know that he was born of Mary. We can know, and we do know, that all flesh will see his glory. So I want to leave you with, invite you to stand up as we sing this song and just glorify God, our Saviour, by things that we don't know, knowing that he knows them and he's in control of them, and we can also glorify him through things that we do know. Let's stand and close with this amazing song.